Yes, areas were places created for developer testing, or content that was ultimately cut by Bethesda. And some are just weird, funny environments in Fallout 4. Basically rooms or levels. Anyway, with that out of the places I've explored in a Fallout game. The preview, this unusable cell is a model of the player's home. Seen in that home, there are instead two well-dressed TV anchors, before furnishing largely being stripped from the master and baby bedrooms, though nothing of note being added there. Oh, yeah, and when you open the front door to leave, no at all, but instead, floating in some weird white space of nothing. Should you jump and fall into this horrifying purgatory, you'll simply be teleported right back to the safety of the home after a couple of seconds. In a cell like this, well, it's clearly associated with the initial broadcast for Soul Survivor witnesses on their TV just as the bombs start to fall. At first, I had thought Bethesda was actually sort of streaming that broadcast from this room. Maybe the developers were actually using this place to record the feed we see on screen. However, given the fact that you don't see yourself on the TV when interacting with the broadcasters, I quickly realized that wasn't the case. Instead, it appears Bethesda was using this room to experiment with the item placements and the animations of the reporter. By the way, the reporter sitting at his desk can be killed and looted, whereas the dude sitting on the table can't even be interacted with. You literally can just walk straight through it. Overall, this is certainly a fun place to find and investigate for a few minutes if you're messing around with the console, but doesn't offer much more beyond that. Let's move on. Before we get to our next spot, let me briefly talk about one of Fallout 4's more disappointing locations. So, the combat zone is a large theater and auditorium located in Boston's theater district. By the time the events of the game have fired off, it's under the control of a large assortment of Raider gangs. They've been using it as a kind of gladiatorial coliseum, where Raiders can watch as various participants battle to the death on the center stage. And they commonly wager huge amounts of cash and goods on the fights. It's pretty neat, as the location isn't really controlled by any single Raider gang, but is instead run and protected by a large collection of various Raider gangs, many of whom have big disagreements with one another, but get along here. Anyway, the reason I called this location somewhat disappointing is that it was actually supposed to be so much more than the simple dungeon that it is today. Despite its backstory and setting, all the combat zone really offers us is another dungeon to clear out. Little more than that. However, Bethesda's original plans for the place were much more grand. As cut dialogue reveals, the Raiders at this location were supposed to be friendly to the player, and we were not only supposed to be allowed in, but given the chance to bet on and participate in the various battles that take place. Not unlike the arena featured in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Well, as it turns out, there's not just cut dialogue associated with the combat zone, but also a whole cut location as well. The Combat Zone 02, as it's referred to in the game's files, is a massive complex only accessible via the console that would have functioned as the sort of backstage to the area's theater. In this cut cell, there are dressing rooms, locker rooms, sleeping bags. It's a pretty large complex. None of this can be found in the base game for the reasons we just discussed. However, it can be assumed that we would have went through this area before appearing for those gladiatorial battles we're supposed to be able to participate in. Alas, for whatever reason, it was not meant to be. And now the Combat Zone 02 rests in the graveyard of inactive Fallout 4 cells. Coming in at number 3, this place is definitely the weirdest of this video. I give you the Debug Range. So, the Debug Range is a large flat plain, roughly the size of Spectacle Island, though it looks a bit weird due to the way the game renders everything. It's filled with unclothed NPCs, T-posing against one-way visual cement walls. There are additionally a number of crafting stations available nearby where you initially spawn in. It's clear from the onset that the debug range was created for some sort of testing purposes. But honestly, I can't figure out what kind of testing they were doing here. When any of the T-posing NPCs are killed, a new one will simply spawn in their place within a few seconds, and then start to T-pose themselves. Though, strange. This leads me to suspect that Bethesda was trying to do something with NPC character animations and commands, or something. I honestly don't know. I will say, it's always very fun stumbling upon these weird test cells with no context. In a game like Fallout 4 that prides itself on showing players the cruel nature of a broken down society, there's just something laughable about finding a bunch of barely clothed people lined up sticking their arms out for no reason. I don't know. Maybe I'm the weird one. Moving on. Or Woodspawn will be teleporting on to the Z Unused Fallout Shelter. This location's console name actually does an excellent job at explaining what it is. It's an unused personal Fallout bunker that never found its way into the game. This location seems to be modeled off of the kind of Fallout shelter that would have been used by, I don't know, maybe a somewhat wealthy single family in their backyard or something. The inside seems pretty luxurious, though. There's a TV, a couch, multiple bunk beds, a kitchen. It all looks quite nice. Though it is worth pointing out that there's not a whole lot of loot inside of here. There's not much food or ammunition you can find, which A, may suggest that the original occupants of this location simply ran out of resources and maybe starved or were forced to flee, or B, might indicate that nobody ever inhabited this place at all. Maybe the people who were supposed to get inside didn't make it in time before the bombs fell. We can find personal Fallout shelters similar to this one in various other locations. So I'm surprised Bethesda didn't go through with implementing this place somewhere. It seems, for the most part, fully developed and ready to go, but for whatever reason, Bethesda decided it should have been implemented. Oh well, while it's no Volt 81, the people who built this place definitely did a good job. And finally, last on our list, we'll be exploring what is likely the best known location of this video, particularly if you're a PC player, QA Smoke. What QA Smoke is essentially the developer's god room, as many players like to call it. It's a small plaza containing containers that house quite literally every single item in the game, and even some that aren't, as well as pretty much every set of power armor too. Seriously, there's a chest containing every single piece of clothing, a chest containing every single piece of ammunition, a chest containing every single possible food item. You get the idea. QA Smoke stands for Quality Assurance Smoke. Essentially, this is the place where Bethesda could easily test out every single item and ensure it's working properly. And importantly, playing nicely with Fallout 4's complex lighting engine, hence the name Smoke. There is a single NPC, a merchant, that stands around at the center of the place, and sometimes interacts with some of the crafting stations. Which, by the way, there are many of. Every station in the game is that. The merchant sells just a few medical items, and sadly doesn't have a whole lot of unique dialogue. However, there is a single terminal on the eastern edges of the area, with a single, somewhat funny note, which reads as follows. Remember, use of the recreational terminal is a privilege. If board performance declines, this privilege may be revoked. Enjoy responsibly. End quote. It seems whoever designed this place and script are jokingly poking fun at whoever else in the dev team decided to use this style. Now, the QA Smoke Room, with all the goodies it has freely available, has become pretty popular with players looking to, sort of, get an advantage in the game. Since it's technically a vanilla asset, it's been integrated as a mod on both the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, and marketed to downloaders as a cheat room type of console. So if you're really active in the Fallout or Bethesda community, you may already be very familiar with this place, for good reason. Nonetheless, I absolutely had to feature QA Smoke in this video. It is definitely the most iconic place we're not supposed to be able to travel to. how's it going, guys? It's Nate here. And the Commonwealth of Fallout 4 is a far cry from the relatively safe and comfortable world that we all know today. Society is broken down and turmoil has built up in this mutant-infested, radiation-sprinkled wasteland. Lucky for us, Fallout 4 is also a game that features hundreds upon hundreds of various weapons to keep us safe in this brave new world. Big and small, ballistic and melee, nuclear and laser powered. You shouldn't have any trouble at all finding an instrument of destruction that suits your fancy. Alas, while many of these arms are fairly
this will come in handy. Probably useful.
common and not too difficult to acquire, there are some objects in the game that are especially rare or particularly unique that you won't find very many of at all. And these items are certainly some of Fallout's most fascinating, as they often boast interesting backstories, fun ties to certain Easter eggs, or are just super powerful. So just south of Hub City Auto Wreckers, right on the banks of the Boston River, lies the Battalion Pump House, a small, unmarked location. Inside there will be two rooms, both covered in a flammable liquid and separated by an inoperable door. The only way to get it open will be by entering the right code on a nearby console. What's the code, you may ask? Well, it's written in big white numbers on the structure's east wall. 0451. Inside this locked room isn't a whole lot, except a bloody skeleton and unique 44 Magnum right next to it. The Gainer. Now, this is a special puppy for a whole lot of reasons. For one, it boasts a unique effect that causes it to burn targets for 15 points of damage with every shot, and causes the item's projectiles to erupt in a neat flame animation whenever they make contact with a character or object. The only other weapon in the game with a similar ability would be the Ashmaker, which we covered in a previous video. The Gainer also comes with the Reflex Sight, Comfort Grip, and Bull Barrel modifications, which can be played around with at your leisure. The base 44 is already a pretty powerful hand cannon, oftentimes capable of one-shotting the right foes, provided you've leveled up the proper perks. But the incendiary ammunition it fires really takes the thing over the edge in both damage and enjoyability. Something else you may find very interesting about this object, and the place we find it in, is that it's actually a bit of a nod to Fahrenheit 451, a dystopian novel by Ray Bradbury, where burning things, particularly books, is a major theme. Hence the reason the code we need to access the Gainer is 0451, and why there's flammable oil all over the town pump house as well. Furthermore, Joel Burgess, a lead level designer at Bethesda Game Studios, who is apparently responsible for implementing the Gainer pistol and the location it's in, described the revolver as a bit of an Easter egg within an Easter egg on Twitter, as not only does it pay homage to Fahrenheit 451, but he named the hand cannon after a fellow game developer friend of his, named Steve Gainer, who evidently previously proclaimed his love for video game magnums. So not only is the Gainer a blast to use, but it's also got a pretty hot background too. I'm sorry. Next on our list, I absolutely have to talk about one of the weirdest and certainly most unique, yet also classic heavy weapons ever featured in a Fallout game. Yes, how could we forget the Jump Jet? Only 2 of these objects can ever be obtained in a single playthrough. One will always spawn in at the ArcJet Systems laboratory, just northwest of the Boston River, and another can be looted off of Manta Man, a hilarious NPC we can meet in a very rare random encounter, who believes himself to be the physical incarnation of a pre-war comic book superhero of the same name. Due to the really weird mechanics of the Jump Jet, which we'll get into in a second, it's actually unusable by NPCs. So Manta Man will only fight players with his fists, despite having the jet in his inventory. But now that we've talked about how you can get it, again just by looting it from ArcJet or murdering Manta Man to death, let's take a deeper dive into this hysterical beast of a cannon. The jet boasts a clearly one-of-a-kind model and texture, made of a variety of strange, rusty steel components, hastily assembled together. And when equipped, let's just say it doesn't handle quite like anything else in the game. Upon trying to load the item with ammunition, you'll be prompted with a unique menu, where you can choose a number of miscellaneous junk items to put into the object's chamber. The jump jet doesn't fire regular ammunition. Instead, it shoots out whatever junk the player decides to load into it. Furthermore, because of this, it has a theoretically infinite magazine capacity. It will continue to fire whatever junk item you tell it to without reloading until you're all out. So if you've got, I don't know, say 1,000 aluminum cans in your inventory, roll with joy, because you won't need to reload until you've lost all 1,000 of them. Most of the projectiles you fire can also be retrieved and used again, with only about 15% being lost due to either respawning or getting stuck in something, further adding clout to the jet's sway with ammo-conscious players. No matter what you choose to load into it, the jet will deal about 40 points of base damage. But each shot can be charged by simply holding down the trigger for up to 1 second. This will increase its potential damage output by another 30 points, allowing it to deal 70 points of damage. And that's all without any perks or stat buffs. The jet also has its own custom family of modifications you can add to it, allowing players to extend its barrel, put on some sights, or even allow it to dish out fire and electro damage. In all seriousness, this could be quite the beast at close ranges with the right stats and customization. Where the jump jet tends to become, well, junk, though, is at medium to long ranges. Its shots have a terrible tendency to arc and drop off at any distances beyond what you would expect with a normal pistol. Don't forget about flight time either. It takes considerably longer for one of the jump jet's projectiles to make contact with an enemy target than it does any normal ballistic weapon. So this item just generally being horrendously inaccurate, coupled with a low rate of fire, makes it not ideal for anything but the closest kinds of engagement. The jump jet is really supposed to represent Fallout 4's sillier side. It's not supposed to be realistic, it's not even supposed to be practical. It's just supposed to be something fun to use, and that it very much is. Players of Fallout 3 will recall this item's spiritual predecessor, the Rock Pig launcher, that operated in a similar, adorable way. I guess, at the end of the day, even in the world of Fallout, the old proverb holds true. One man's trash is another man's ammunition. Coming in at number 3, this one's special. We have an object that's literally impossible to obtain without the use of mods or simple console commands on the PC. The animatronic alien blaster. This is a unique type of laser pistol introduced with the New World DLC that we players are never given the opportunity to acquire. It's used by the animatronic alien foes which populate the galactic zone of the amusement park, and it bears a striking resemblance to the alien blaster we acquire off of the UFO in Fallout 3. Now, again, sadly we can never link one of these devices off of defeated enemies. However, funnily enough, if we equip one through the console, we can discover that the animatronic alien blaster does indeed have proper first-person animations, and even a reloading animation, implying that Bethesda did go through all the work necessary to make this item a usable one, and then just didn't. In the base game, we do of course have access to another type of alien blaster we can take off of a wounded alien following a spaceship crash. It has pretty much identical stats and identical foot size, dealing 50 points of energy damage with 42 rounds a clip. Pretty nice. However, the unobtainable alien blaster enjoys a radically different model and texture. And interestingly, while it uses a unique type of ammunition called alien blaster rounds, the animatronic version uses fusion cells. Furthermore, I should point out that despite being unobtainable, not only does the animatronic have that whole suite of animations I mentioned, but it can also be brought to a workbench, where a whole host of mods can be added to it. All of the applicable modifications are the same ones we can add to the regular alien blaster, and they even yield the same appearance. But it only goes to show that Bethesda really did do all of the work necessary to make it a usable item for the player. It's a shame this item never made the final cut of the game. Maybe Todd was wrong. Maybe some things don't always just work, after all. For fun, this tenacious 10mm was definitely the most recommended item in our last video of the series. So how could we ignore the Deliverer? A unique sidearm with a totally custom mesh and texture. Now, unlike other weapons featured in this video, the Deliverer is in fact obtained via quest, which makes its inclusion here kind of cheating, but when has that stopped us before? During the railroad quest, Trade Trap, where the player and Deacon inspect the remains of a recently attacked underground railroad base, Deacon will notice the Deliverer lying on the corpse of an agent. He'll point it out, saying it was custom made by Tinker Tom for that fallen soldier, before offering it up to the sole survivor. Simply walk up to the thing, pick it up, and she's all yours. Dealing 25 points of damage a shot, well, better than most recoil management and greatly reduces the range in which enemies will hear it go off, and can therefore be alerted to your presence when firing. However, it also reduces the item's actual range and makes it far weaker at a distance. Personally, my own recommendation would be that you take it to a workbench and remove the suppressor, preferably swapping it for an extended barrel, which, yes, is something you can do. I actually had always assumed that the suppressor couldn't be taken off until it was pointed out to me in the comment section of that last video, and it's a pretty cool result you get. You can make it look like a totally different device with the right modifications. Removing that suppressor will enable the deliverer to pack a much bigger punch, particularly at distances, so long as you can tolerate the cost to your stealth. That said, I can still understand not wanting to give the suppressor up. It sort of feels like an integral part of this item. It makes you feel like James Bond or something. Do whatever you please. It's your sidearm. Just make sure not to get any Raider remains all over your freshly pressed suit. Before we get to our final spot, there is one honorable mention I would like to discuss, regardless. It's a unique weapon you can first encounter behind a lockbox in the Overseer's quarters of Vault 111. When we find it for the first time, we shouldn't be able to access it. It will require a lockpicking skill that we just won't possess. Now, there may or may not be a few exploits you can engage in to get it a bit early, but I digress. What Bethesda clearly actually wants us to do is come back after we've ranked up our lockpicking skill quite a bit. And boy oh boy, is doing so worth it. Basically, the Cryolator is a flamer that shoots ice, and is far more powerful. It creates a cryogenic spray that bombards enemies with a massive area of effect, and does 20 points of damage. By contrast, flamers, which do the same thing but with a fire spray, only do 12 points of damage. Of course, there's also a whole selection of different modifications that you can apply to the Cryolator. Each will do different things, but a very interesting one is the crystallizing barrel. This will convert it from a spraying device into an automatic shooter. It makes the Cryolator far more ammo efficient, and also increases the range, increases the damage, as crystals will now do ballistic and energy damage, and it also makes it fairly easier to handle. Though, that said, I will admit, if you're going for an automatic shooter, some heavily modded out laser pistols or rifles may be a bit of a better bet. Though, let's be honest, they're not nearly as fun. The Cryolator does also have some interesting lore behind it we can read about on the Overseer's Vault 111 terminal. You see, after the bombs fell and everybody in Vault 111 was sealed away in cryopods, there still needed to be a staff inside of alive humans to make sure everything was going okay. And there still was an Overseer. This Overseer got incredibly bored. So, as a way to occupy his time, he decided to develop this puppy. Using a variety of components and chemicals that were already available in the Vault thanks to its cryopod experiment, it wasn't that difficult for him to create this item's prototype. Alas, eventually the staff of Vault 111 grew to hate each other, and they all murdered each other to death. So nobody was able to access this thing. Until you came around. So, what are we waiting for? It's time to take the Commonwealth by storm.
Hi, it's Prada, and I'm a Walmart pharmacist. Flu season is upon us, and we're making it easy for you to get a flu shot at Walmart pharmacies across the country. Book your flu shot today on walmart.ca/help. Appointments are subject to lasting availability.
And finally, last on our list, there's one more makeshift heavy weapon, somewhat similar to the junk jet in its aesthetic that I'd like to show off. The railway rifle. So, while pretty rare, there are a couple of opportunities you should get to obtain this fascinating device. The first is at Big John Salvage south of Quincy, specifically in a small hidden bunker beneath a train cart that we can gain access to after flipping the appropriate switch and disabling its locking mechanism. The second location it spawns in is at Bedford Station, within a blue train carriage towards the southern outskirts of the station. Notably, it only spawns in here if you're level 20 or higher, so do bear that in mind. Furthermore, the railway rifle can also be pickpocketed off of Desdemona due to the railroad quest Tactical Thinking, or found on Tinker Tom during Underground Undercover. So, assuming you join the railroad, you should get about 4 chances to obtain this puppy, or 2 if you decide not to. Nonetheless, I think the railway rifle is absolutely a worthy addition to any arsenal for reasons I can hopefully make obvious. Dealing a whopping 100 points of base damage without any perks or mods, you're going to be dishing out one-hit kills like nobody's business. For context, this is higher than pretty much any other non-Gauss rifle in the entire game, and its incredible accuracy is also definitely something to write home about. Unlike the jump jet or other makeshift weapons, the railway rifle's rounds have almost no drop-off, and aim almost always where you're actually going to hit, largely irrespective of distance. Great accuracy and a source of barrel mods and scopes and high power makes it a shockingly viable sniper. But that's far from where this item's utility ends. Its fire rate is decent enough that it handles itself fairly in close-range combat. And even when you don't one-shot with it, the railway rifle pretty much will always stagger enemies, buying you a precious second or two before your foe can retaliate. Eccentric soul survivors can also consider adding an automatic receiver to the item, making it fully automatic, which has some amusing implications. But I wouldn't recommend that, as the railway rifle uses a special kind of ammo called railway spikes, which are rather rare and can't be crafted. They can be bought from certain merchants, but you really don't want to waste them. The rifle's design is clearly meant to remind us of locomotives. Steam emits from its chambers, and when you reload the thing, it even chews at you, which is adorable. Fallout 3 featured a railway rifle of its own. However, it was by far and away a much weaker version than its current variant, and it didn't even chew at you. So back then, there wasn't much of a reason to pay any attention. But I'm pleased to report that in Fallout 4, it is absolutely an item worthy of your consideration. And with that, we are going to wrap up. 5 more secret or otherwise unique items you may have missed in Fallout 4 Part 3. At least I think it's Part 3. Yeah, well, we'll figure that out later. Anyway, thanks for stopping by, everybody. Which of these instruments of offense and defense suited your fancy the most? Which ones did I miss? Leave a comment down below. As always, like ratings are very much appreciated, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.
Hey guys, back with another video, and today I wanted to go over some hidden or secret weapon locations in Fallout 4. Now, before we start, this video is mostly going to be going over non-legendary as well as non-unique weapons in Fallout 4 that you may be familiar with, but may appear in places that you might not have expected. So again, while you may know what the actual weapons are, you may not have known that they could appear in some of the locations I'm about to go over. With this in mind, I'd like to issue a bit of a challenge to you guys. If you didn't know every location or learned something in this particular video, leave a like on this video. But if you did know every location, feel free to leave a dislike. But with all of the intro out of the way, let's go ahead and start with number 10, and that is going to be the 44 pistol that is near Sanctuary. There's a pretty good chance that a couple of veteran players out there will know the location of this particular 44 pistol, but just in case you don't, this weapon is located at an unmarked location that is between Sanctuary Hills and another location called the Robotics Disposal Ground. All you have to do is cross the bridge out of Sanctuary, then go down to the small creek and walk along it until you find some tubing or what looks like some kind of water filtration system. From here, try to get on top of it, and you should be able to find a 44 pistol located on or near the unit itself. Now, you may have to take out a few low-level bandits that are nearby, but they shouldn't be too much of a challenge this early on in the game. The reason you would want to go ahead and pick this pistol up is because the 44 pistol is Fallout 4's best non-DLC pistol. It deals an impressive 48 damage per shot before upgrades, outpacing pretty much every other early game weapon, and deals an excess of 80 damage when it's fully upgraded. making it one of the better pistols later on in the game. The only problem with the 44 pistol is that it can't be suppressed, and finding ammo for it early on can be difficult. However, it is worth mentioning that ammo can usually be bought in stores. Now, while you will find better 44 pistols as you progress through the story, you might as well go ahead and obtain this one early on and keep it for some of the early fights, especially if you're focusing on the pistol builds. Number 9, the combat shotgun between Backstreet Apparel and Diamond City. Now, I have to issue a bit of a disclaimer about the hidden location of this combat shotgun. It's worth mentioning that if you visit this area, you're not necessarily guaranteed to always get a combat shotgun. However, with that said, of the 3 to 4 times I've tested this, I did receive a combat shotgun fairly frequently. And if I did receive a combat shotgun, I either got a standard double-barrel shotgun, and one time I actually managed to get a pair of lasers with the scatter mod attached. So I would say even if you don't get a combat shotgun from doing this, it's still worth it to at least come here and see what you can get. All you have to do is make your way to an alleyway that's south of Backstreet Apparel, but is slightly northeast of Diamond City. Now, you'll know that you're at the right place when you start to encounter a couple of raiders. Go ahead and dispatch them, and then look around for 2 different gun tracks. One should be along a small wall right next to some stairs, while the other should be pretty close by in what looks like a small windowsill. Now, in my experience, I've found that one of these tracks should have a combat shotgun, while the other has a regular double barrel. So, like I said, you may not always find a combat shotgun here. Still, I think you should go ahead and visit this location, and if you did manage to get a combat shotgun, leave it in the comments below. Number 8, the railway rifle at Big John's Salvage. So, the railway rifle is a pretty powerful weapon that's great for both riflemen and commander's builds. It deals 100 damage per shot, and it also has relatively cheap and retrievable ammo, making the railway rifle a great choice for both the early and later game, especially in non-survival difficulties where you don't have to worry about ammo weights. Now, normally, you have to wait until level 20 in order to acquire a railway rifle. However, you can acquire one at any level by making a visit to a location called Big John's Salvage that's just south of the Boston metropolitan area. While this area is fairly dangerous, given that it's swarming with super mutants of various levels, if you can manage to get inside, flip a circuit breaker that's connected to an overturned blue rail car near the house, you can actually climb on top of the rail car and then enter the hatch to the bunker itself. Once inside, you should see the railway rifle right in front of you. This is ultimately a great location to get the railway rifle. While it may be difficult to get early on because Big John's Salvage is quite dangerous, I think it's something you should definitely go and try to do. Number 7, the Ripper at West Everett Estates. While West Everett Estates has a bunch of super mutants that you have to contend with, there is a guaranteed Ripper that can spawn at this location that you might overlook. The Ripper itself is located near the entrance to the backyard bunker on a cabinet, with the backyard bunker entrance being located in a small shack that's connected to the yellow house that's closest to the gated off water tower. Ultimately, I'd recommend you go ahead and try to take out all of the enemies in this location. That way you can retreat the Ripper safely. But I suppose if you wanted to run in with power armor and constantly take stim packs to get it, you could do it that way as well. Otherwise, it's a Ripper, and is one of the best melee weapons in the Minimal 4. While it may lack the range of most of the melee weapons, it can attack several times a second, potentially allowing you to rack up a lot of damage. And if you manage to craft an extended blade for it, it will add a bleed component, further increasing the overall damage. While you will be able to get a unique Ripper that's more useful in the Fall Harbor DLC, getting the Ripper at this location can prove to be quite useful. So I'd recommend you pick it up whether you have the DLC or not. Number 6, the Combat Rifle at Greater Mass Blood Clinic. The Combat Rifle is one of the best rifles in Fallout 4 once it has been upgraded to accept 308 caliber ammo. Before in DLC, the combat rifle was the best weapon that made use of 45 caliber ammo. And for that reason, it's definitely worth obtaining a combat rifle until you can gain access to the Far Harbor DLC, where you can reliably obtain a Greater Mass Blood Clinic. If you're unsure where the Greater Mass Blood Clinic is, it's directly south of Fort Hagen, and all you have to do when you arrive is kill a couple of the blood bugs and blowflies in the area, make your way to the roof of the building, and once you're there, the combat rifle should be lying on the ground right near some shotgun shells. The nice thing about this location is that the combat rifle will always be here, regardless of your level. So you could easily come here as early as level 1 or 2, then fast travel back to Sanctuary and make the first several areas and missions in the game a big walk. Ultimately, this is a pretty great big weapon location, and I think you'll find obtaining a combat rifle this way makes the early game much easier. Number 5, the Radium Rifle northwest of the ruined church. So, the Radium Rifle is a pretty awesome weapon that could be obtained in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC. Now, you may be interested to know that the Radium Rifle consists of going to the nucleus and talking to the children of Adam. You can always go to this particular location and receive a Radium Rifle. So, starting at the ruined church, you're going to want to look at your map and orient yourself traveling towards the northwest. Once you've done this, simply travel northwest, and you should eventually come upon a shack. Simply go inside, and on your left, you should see the Radium Rifle right